organization and architecture. It's about I/O organization. All right. I/O means input-output organization. Okay. Vậy na chuan input-output organization chung chang kan soi don ani. As I already announced, this subject is not an easy subject. It's a little bit tough, and therefore it needs some attention. Okay, you need to pay attention in order to understand fully. If you don't understand anything during the lecture, please don't hesitate to ask me. You can interrupt me and ask questions so that I can repeat whatever it is not clear to you. Okay? Kaka kan tinan turani kan lecture line engemo share thiam lo le chiang lo deu a omani chuan ron soi she lo la in ron zo tanga chuan chu mi chu soi fia zel kan tum don ani chu chu kan kalpum tur ni ta se athange. Okay, let's get started now. First of all, you need to know what is peripherals related to computer. Have you ever heard about peripherals in computer? I hope so, right? Peripherals are input or output devices attached to the computer. Okay. Among the most common peripherals, keyboard, mouse, monitor, etc., printers, etc., are peripherals. Okay. Those hard disks, random access memory, which are fit inside the computer, are not peripheral. Those peripherals are those computer parts which are connected to the computer. For example, speaker also, which is connected to the computer. So they are peripherals. Devices that are under the direct control of computer are said to be online devices. Okay, when we say online, we usually refers to internet, but in this chapter, when we say online devices, it doesn't refer to the devices on the internet. It refers to the computer parts which are fit inside computer CPU, which are under the direct control of the CPU. Okay, those are known as online devices. Okay, let me explain briefly in Miso. Peripherals the computer parts to ani amaro chu achunga vuat chi ni lo computer ne na zom chi ang chi ha peripherals ani example chuan keyboard mouse kan tiang chi te hi peripherals ani chuan online devices ti om le ta online devices chu computer chunga vuat chi ani ve thunga antenna RAM te po computer chung kan vuat thi na chung chu online devices kan ti ani achiang mai em. Can I go to the next slide, please?
Yes, sir.
I hope so. Now, I/O interfacing. So we are going to study the interface between CPU and input-output devices. Okay. So I/O interfaces provides a method for transferring information between internal storage such as memory or CPU register with external I/O devices or peripherals. Okay. This I/O interfacing resolves the difference between computers and peripheral devices. You need to know the difference between computers, online devices, as well as peripheral devices. Peripheral devices are mostly electromechanical devices. They do not operate on digital signals, but they operate on mechanical signals. Okay, and CPU, memory, etc. are electronics devices. So electronics devices are much faster than the mechanical devices. All right. Heta kan soi hi mizo in kan soi non le lok anga I/O interfaces emo I/O interfacing kan ti hian computer online devices ho achunga vuachi CPU memory khang ho le peripherals kan ti I/O devices chang keyboard mouse speaker printer khang ho in connect dan kha asay na ni tani interfacing chumi connect hey tur chuan parts apoi mo chumi electronics parts chu I/O interface ti ania chu I/O input output interfacing ti ani boktani chu I/O interface in anato ber chu heng peripherals devices tele khami computer parts achu ngami te kha lungrual taka na thok thei tura siam khane mai achan chu an na tho dan ki kha ainang lawa peripheral devices te kha electromechanical devices ani tani antenan keyboard te po ti an kan met kau kawa kha electronics keyboard ani lo shim ta kan keyboard man chin ni computer chuan achung lam ve thung kha chu electronics 0 le 1 mangana thok chi ani ve thung tani keyboard ero chu 0 le 1 mangana thok chi ani lawani chu wang chuan chu mi te dang lam na kha solve theya na thok ho theya siam thei tur chuan IO interface kan mamo ani chu IO interfacing IO interface board te ponti aming chan ani all right, let's go to the next slide. So let's continue with IO interfacing. The data transfer rate in IO interfacing, in these peripherals, they are usually slower because they are operating on mechanical devices. But CPU and memory are usually faster than peripherals because they operate on electronics or digital signals, okay? The unit of informations, for example, peripherals are measured in bytes or blocks, but CPU or memory is measured in terms of words. Please try to remember peripherals are operated on bytes or blocks, but CPU or memory operates on words. Okay, data representation may also be differ. Yes, they obviously differ because the mode in which they are working is not same. Therefore, and the data representation is also differ. Now I'll show you the IO interface modules. So this IO interface or IO bus, input-output bus, or the interface module is shown here, which is taken from your textbook. There will be IO interface, and that IO interface will be connected to the different computer buses. We have address bus, data line bus, or control line bus, okay? And from these three IO buses, these three IO buses are known as system bus. IO module will be there, IO module, okay? IO modules link to peripheral devices, okay? IO module link to the peripheral devices. So one of the most common IO modules nowadays is USB. USB in Shanghai, in short ka say a full form in Siam USB full form run soi thei na mem kan mang lara aron lara USB hi a full form in Siam o universal serial bus ti na ani chu wang chuan USB hi IO module example pai mo deuh mai tun lai kan man lar em ani ti kha in shadonia hemi slide kan huang hian computer chuga motherboard a khan bus chi thum a oma chu system bus ti ani a address data le control bus kal na te khanita khang ho ne na in connect to IO module ani IO module a khan peripherals devices strang kha avua theya chu example chuan USB karon manga USB and printer po vot heya mouse po vot heya keyboard po vot heya chu wang chuan USB kha IO module angin angai to the ani. Then each peripherals has an interface module associated with it. Okay, different peripheral will have different interfaces associated with it. And functions of the interface are decode the device address. It will decode the device address in electronics form so that it will be understood by the computer CPU, okay? Decode the commands. When you press enter, you are giving some command. So that commands needs to be decoded by the CPU, okay? And provide signal for the peripheral controller, okay? It also provides signals to the peripheral controller and synchronize data flow and supervise the transfer rate between peripheral and CPU or memory. This is very, very important. These are the functions of the interface, especially the IO interface. Let me explain in Mizo. peripheral interfaces how dang vek aron tia kan le kabu ayan mase tu na chuan common nam han the an songa USB hi common kan man the sang pakhat ani a example a chuan printer po USB mangina connect theya chuan keyboard po USB mangina connect theya chuan mouse po USB mangina connect the tur en siam ta peripheral module khai nang deuh tang puitani amaro chu monitor hi USB mangina connect thelo kakhan ashan an chu wang chuan atlang pui thu in peripheral devices a device ashan dana zirin a connect thei na IO module kha adang lam tura ngai tur ni tane chuan khang IO module na tho ho heta hian ron so ya pakhat na chuan device address ko ya chang ron kal nge eng device nge ni address kha i CPU shet thei turin khami IO module khan electronic form a chan tir chuan command enter tekan han meta thil chi sang sang entenan webcam telo ni ta se i on chia ta chuan a command kha CPU shet thei zong turin a convert a chantir chuan chumi lo po chu peripherals controller ho kha tinan printer khan thil print make ta sela a busy don tani khami printer kha busy signal kha peripheral IO module khan CPU a pe ka ngai CPU khan printer in thil ti me ka thil dang command lo to tiang song te khan busy signal kha pe ka ngai chuan synchronize data flow printer in thil print chua kha machine te shia thei chi ani a electronics form ani lawa chu fan chuan amuang pi kani amaro chu CPU khan athil print tur athon sung kha electronics data ani wangin digital data ani wang khan achak bik ta khami inkar thil chakle thil muang inkar po kha anin rual theinan anin rem katidon in rem ni chelo an tho ho theinan khan IO module to na IO interface kan ti hian na thokani kan soi tamta IO interfaces chung chang chu a chiang viau tura ka ngai in ngai thak that chuan. All right, let's go to the next one. IO instruction format. Okay, previously we talked about the instruction format. That instruction format is usually the instruction format of the CPU. Okay, that, excuse me. Presentation masalama khan slide masalama khan instruction format kan soi china to me instruction format kan soi how to CPU atanga register a instruction pe ngai te CPU atanga memory instruction pe ngai te khan itlang po ya IO instruction format tak hi chu kan la tur bing la wa tu na hian kan soi don ani the IO instruction format is given below. Just like the general instruction format, there will be the operation code, what operation needs to be done, and the device address from which device that instructions is coming in, and the function code or the command, what is the thing which needs to be done. All right, this is there are three fields in the IO instruction format: the opcode, the device address, and the function code. All right. And IO buses and IO interfaces modules, which I have already represented in the previous slide, which is connected to the different IO buses. But this is a more detailed explanation or detailed diagram about how IO interfaces and IO buses are working together. On the other side, you will find the processor. The processor will be connected to the IO buses, data bus, address bus, and control bus. So its devices is supposed to have its own interfaces, even though there may be some devices which share the interface. Okay, keyboard and display terminal will have their own interface, printer will have their own interface, magnetic disk, we never use magnetic disk nowadays, we'll have interfaces and magnetic tape. Yeah, we never use magnetic tape. We use magnetic disk, we never use magnetic tape. I am sorry. And so these will have their own interfaces. These interfaces will be connected to the different buses, the three buses, the system buses. Okay, this is the way of connection between the CPU and the input-output interfaces. In chat here, ma'am. hey hi nichina diagram hetilai kan so aya chiang so ka so na mai khani IO input output device sang peripheral kan ti bok te kha CPU ne na anin zom dan ti hian chiang so kin karun tar lang le ani le kha boina run tar lang le ani chu device as a in interface ran cheu nei tu rangai an ni kha interface ho khan system bus and the address bus, data bus, control bus te kha ava po anga chumi address bus, control bus, data bus te khan processor apo don tan it is one communication ha te don ani tuna ka so ichina khan zo du nei inomem nge soinon le la ti deute in name. Any response from you? All right, after talk to now let's go to input output commands. Okay, the different commands operated with the input output devices. Okay, the first one is control command. It is issued to activate the peripheral or to inform what to do. First of all, it needs to be activated. All right. For example, speaker. Take a look at that. Say, i-on poda to activate na kanimaya. So and then monitor tipo khoi lower kan ti chet chuan low thim ta chuan kan va khoi chet chuan keyboard and mouse kan khoi chet chuan arun eng le chu activate. So that command is known as control command. Then the status command. Status command is used to test the various status conditions in the interfaces and the peripherals. Okay, status ave thung chuan printer big ha example han ti tai la i on to chuan print din munadin to chuan ready state am don ta chuan tila print make ani chuan a status kan fa en chuan printing tmo busy tmo khani dona chuan chuan status sang kha device te khan an nei ve. So the status commands are used to check the status of the different peripheral devices. Output data. This causes the interface to respond by transferring data from the buses into one of its resistors. Okay, one of its resistor. So output data chuan peripheral devices atanga output vapi anga khan in ngai ta ola bus kaltlang in nisina connection kan soi kaltlang khan CPU resistor ate khan data vada alu don ta se chu output data ati te yanga input data ve thung hi chu this is the opposite of the output data. In this case the interface receive an item of data from the peripheral and place it in its buffer resistor. Okay, hemi ve thung hi chu entianan printer thil printer computer atangin ithona chu printer tan khan input command chi khat chu ni maya. Okay, like that you can think like that. Now let's dig deeper inside the computer. So let's talk about IO and memory buses. There are two types of buses, IO buses and memory buses. The IO buses connect to the input-output devices, and the memory buses connected to the memory devices such as the random access memory, the read-only memory, the hard disk, and the resistors. Okay, so IO buses le memory buses ka share lo to rani ashan ve ani IO bus chuan input output devices ho kan data an thon train chuan memory bus chuan memory devices ho kan data an thonin an dong bok train. All right, so computer can use a single common bus for both memory or IO buses depending on the design of the computer. Now it's clear. Different computer will have different architecture and different design. Some computer will simply have one buses which will be common to the memory as well as the I/O devices. But some other computer designer may prefer that, okay, I have to give separate I/O buses and memory buses. Okay, so they will have separate I/O and memory buses. Het lai kan sai per chu mi zo trong in han sai le don tai la I/O bus le memory bus hi ashanin kan du chuan om turin kan design thea I/O bus ho khan input output tenen khan anin connect big don ta memory bus ho kha chu memory shang register changa primary memory RAM ROM le secondary memory hard disk tenen khan ngain connect don ta mase computer designer chen khat chuan boi thla mai khatianga design pakhat hi siamila in trom mai ro se antivet he tho bok ani. So computer can be used to communicate. Computer bus can be used to communicate with memory and I/O in three ways. Chitumin ain communicate thei ti kha ani tani hetai chone ai nang ngai tai lai nang khatiom je chu bus pakhat memory ne le I/O tenen na communicate nan chuan chitumin a communicate the atia he hin le khabuina ran tarlan ne a poimo mai thea use one common bus but separate control line for its function. All right, this is one form, and another form is use common bus with common control lines for both function. And the third one is some computer system use two separate buses, one to communicate with memory and other with I/O devices. Okay, this is what I already explained, but let me explain in more in Mizo language. This is nakan soyang khan I/O bus in ang lomang don ta ila common bus I/O bus in ang kan so system bus computer bus in ang lomang ta ila chu I/O tan le memory tan khan control line chan kha kan petheya amar chu common bus mang thau sin a control na chau kha line chan kan pethe ti na ni chu adang le chuan I/O bus ai nanga control line po kha ai nanga chuan adang le chuan ashan liao ashan pa liao khan kan siam sak thei chu the three ways in which computer buses can be used to communicate with memory and I/O devices. All right, I/O bus chung chang kan soi chun zom to na tuna ka soi china khan zo du te in nei chuan in azo thei reng ani in ning to zo kem le ning lo niang tro response om no kem ai. All right, I/O bus kan thil zir hi mizo train han soi le lok tai la ate tham lu tu kania ni na taka chuan computer a po khami memory le I/O devices ivavu na in kara motherboard ani ma mang chu motherboard a data line kal ho kha ani kan soi te thil te tham tak ani kan soi. Now let's talk about I/O buses. Communication between CPU and all the interface unit is via a common I/O buses. Okay, an interface connected to the peripheral devices may have a number of data registers and a control register and a status registers. So its peripheral devices will have their own register in that I/O interface. Okay, a command is passed to the peripheral by sending the appropriate interface registers. So whenever you are trying to use that peripheral devices, some command will be sent by the peripheral interface. Function call and sense lines are not needed. Transfer of data, control, and status information is always via a common bus. Okay, in this I/O bus, input output bus bika chuan common line kha input output ho khan an mang ti kharon so ya chu motherboard a khanan design ti na ni maya command line chuan chung command line ho kha command line an manawang khan data register te control register te status register te kha alo angai ta ne a chuan device chang po kha value chan cheu an nei chuan a share chan thei don a chu wang chuan kha a reng bokani khoya nge kan ti chuan IO interface a khan ta chuan command akal reng khan interface register khan a in register ang CPU register so ilo tun a chuan interface register so ya interface register khan a in record vekanga chuan function code le sense line te chu a ran pa in angai to lo khatianga status register te control register te data register te bok khan chu wang chuan data transfer mo control mo status te kha common bus mangin CPU khan adu huna ava ente heti lai common bus kan soi be ki in shiat atana kadu chu CPU atanga IO interface in kar kha common bus an mang ti na ani ti khan in shiat chian ka be say. Now let's talk about isolated IO. Okay, isolated IO, isolated input-output devices. So these are the different characteristics of isolated IO. Separate IO read or write control lines in addition to the memory read or write control lines. And separate or isolated memory or IO address spaces and distinct input and output instructions. Computer design dan sidang le ani le thungan ichu isolated IO achuan isolated IO achuan read le write then control lines te kha ashan ve in mga memory po read le write control line kha ashan ve in don tinan ichu pali ngai don ichu chuan memory akal le IO akal to address line po ka asan pa dona chu wang chuan asan vek ani dona anin ti buai don lowa isolated IO chuan chu wang chuan input instruction po ka asan in thea output instruction bi po ka asan in thei ti na ani chu claim in a complicated don ti na ani another one is memory map IO. Memory map IO ti ka leta in this memory map IO, a single set of read or write control line, no distinction between memory and IO transfer. In this memory map IO, they share the same line. Okay, memory and IO addresses share the same address space. Even address space also are same, and reduced memory address range available. All right, no specific input-output instruction. This is the opposite of isolated IO, and considerable flexible in handling IO operations. Amahan isolated IO kasoy chia chuan tunahan memory map IO kansoy le chia isolated IO ka memory map IO nen khan ain le link thok timaya memory map IO isolated IO chuan read le write control line ka shana memory read le write poka control line ka shana hetai chuan they share the same. Okay, the same control line, no distinction between. So may panilawin isolated IO chuan memory address le IO address ka ashanin nakala, but in this memory map address they share the same memory address space. Okay, and isolated IO can separate instructions for input and output. Okay, input separate instruction format for input as well as separate instruction format for output anita. Masehe that memory map IO atuan separate lauta ay nang vek anita ni. Kaka computer designer kan atu danin a design teya. Just to design dan command pani tu na kanaron soy so tia. Just isolated IO le memory map IO ani tika lausia ula atra ange. Tikan computer chung CPU le peripheral devices how in connect dan karon soy so ta in chat here mem angai thalo tan kha chuan bo na tham fe chu ka soi to in ka hria a tlemin kan revise le anga computer part of poimo better kan tiang chu CPU hinita CPU chu khan register te oma kan zir to veka chuan ALU oma control unit te oma chuan connection line te kham tani chumi CPU chu motherboard afu ani motherboard khan line shan oma chu system bus antia chithuma then ani address bus control bus le nge dang le address bus control bus le data bus ani kha tero khang pathum khaum tani chuan peripheral devices kan ti chuan computer chunga vu chi ni lo apon lama vu chi a cable manga vu emo direct taka pen drive he te va vi lu ang chi te poni theya ka ho ka peripheral devices fek kan ni ta chung ho chu connection na om theina na poimo chu IO interface antitani IO interface khan register data status register te control register te data register te kha ani ta chuan CPU le IO interface in kar khan common bus kha omta ashan pa ni lawin IO interface chang in connect to nu khan ti khan ashan pa in to lawin common line kha kalta chu fan CPU khana do hun hun ani khan interface ho status ka check the ta chuan khatiang in connect dan chang kan soya chung jing a chuan isolated IO le memory map IO ti te kan soita period khadatan khan chuan tuna ka soi chen hi atok fiao chuan ka hria zo na in nei lo chuan period khadatan kan du tok pot don ania. Any question from you? In chathia mem han so en chang shim te ole in re mai in join en kalpo dai te lo ni pala
Thiam sir.
alle in chathia chuan alom ame ti chuan recording kan